Welcome to Sullivan Street, the first episode of the new Counting Crows podcast. I'm your host, Eric Vogelsang, and I'm here with my co-host, Chris Miggs. And I guess one question to start it off for both of us, why now? Why did we decide to do this podcast? Counting Crows has, I guess from my standpoint, first of all, podcasts are more and more popular. I didn't see a Counting Crows podcast except for Adam's Underwater Sunshine, which we can talk about at some point, but he doesn't usually talk about the Crows too much. It's about more of his love and for music and etc. But
It's good to be here. It's great
yeah.
and also the answer, I think the answer really is why not, right? Hasn't it always been fun to talk about Counting Crows? Aren't they the most fun band? One of the most fun bands to talk about, and especially if you're a Crows fan.
Yeah, and right, and they've been 30 years, right? And so in some ways, I don't want to say perfect time, but they're at the point of their career where you can look at them retrospectively and talk about the career as a whole. And a lot of us have our either youth tied to them or part of our history, emotional history, etc. But also they're not done yet, right? They're still around, they're still touring, and we hope release new music. And so yeah, I think it is a perfect time. And any other before I introduce you more, any other comments about having the podcast,
Well, no,
etc.?
they're about to go. We talked about they're about to go on a 3-month tour. So while we're recording this, I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but we're recording this before that happens. But we'll be talking about that, and there'll be new things, and we'll be seeing what they're playing, and hopefully new versions of things and interesting stuff to discuss coming out of them being on the road for, I think, certainly the longest time they've been on the road since the pandemic, and probably even a little bit before that.
Yeah, the idea for the podcast right now is to release a episode every, let's just say, 3 to 4 weeks. That's the current plan. We'll go from that, and hope to get people involved. I know, so Counting Crows social media, from what I understand, I'm just getting back into social media a little bit. I basically have been off social media for like a decade, but I'm back on Reddit, on the Crows Reddit. But the Crows social media, from what I understand, Facebook groups, etc., are still fairly active, and that's how people connect with each other. And we think this is just another way to get the community involved. And we'll mention sometime later that we do want people to join us on occasion, even if it's a one time, or if you're a heavily active member or just have particular comments about a certain part of Counting Crows, which we'll get into later. But okay, so let's introduce ourselves. I guess this is the episode to do this. This episode 1 is called, of course, Step Out the Front Door, because we're starting the podcast. And I think it's the first line, I guess, of Around Here, which was the track 1 of their first album. So my name's Eric Vogelsang. My just brief background, well, I guess as far as I'll just mention only the part about, podcasting radio. This is my first podcast I've hosted. I did do radio work about 15 years ago for about 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years, primarily worked in news radio as reporting and hosting the news. And Chris, what about you?
I am I don't claim professional bona fides, although I did work on my college radio station and played a good bit of Counting Crows back in the day. WHRC, Haverford College Radio, which probably still does not exist in this point. No one listens. Barely anyone listened in the early 2000s. I'm not sure if anyone listens now. And you can also find me talking across the web on Predetermined, a Pro Wrestling Hangout, and other podcasts from time to time. Yes, Eric, I'm curious. How did you get into Counting Crows?
Thank you. Yeah, I was gonna kick off, and it is funny you said that about the college radio, because you're right. I sometimes think, especially when you listen to August, it has that '90s sound. I think more than the other albums do. There's just something about that album that kind of screams that era. And I was thinking, because you're right, I was on college radio too and played a little bit of that, and some other bands remind me of that sound. Of course, a lot of those bands didn't last more than one album, and my obsession has lasted for decades.
Yeah, that's interesting because, well, and we'll derail a little bit. It was a podcast. We can do this. It's interesting because to me, that album is meant to be a college radio album. Like that was the goal. That was the height was supposed to be, we'll get played on college radio and have enough people listen that we can go on tour. And of course, end up being sold 10 million records. It's massive.
Mm,
But it's interesting to me that that's, I think, still part of the DNA of the band, and kind of has always been part of the DNA of the band, is the kind of people who, and actually it's interesting, there's a long time ago, there was a quote unquote study. I put that in air quotation marks that no one can see if they're not looking at video. Um, about how like smart people like what music makes you smart. And realistically, when you actually look at the study, it's actually going the other way. It's like, what music do people who went to colleges with high average SAT scores listen to, which
mm.
is proof of basically nothing. But interestingly, Counting Crows were up there, right? The people who like went to, wanted to hang out and like talk about books, also wanted to talk about, listen to Counting Crows and go to those shows, which is not the
That's
most surprising thing to me.
It's very interesting. I know Adam would like that. I think. So yes, you asked me about I guess how I became a
Yeah,
fan. Is that or kind of
yeah. Well,
indirectly?
how'd you get into it?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you the same, of course. And I said anybody that joined us, I'll ask them similar questions, which is
Mm-hmm.
why what brought you to the Crows, what keeps you coming back, why do you think they're special, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you feel that way. Yeah, you know what? It's I was thinking about this, and I was in college at the time, and now I'm not. I forget when how the timing worked between like Mr. Jones being released and the album, and that's something I'll check on. But yeah, I do remember a lot of. I don't want to say I was one of the first people to buy the albums because I remember that there were a couple friends, and I think even my old roommate had the August album before me. I remember seeing it, and Mr. Jones, of course, was on the radio. But it was, and I said, "Oh, this is a great song." Like there were a lot of great songs at the time, but just
Mm-hmm.
more and more, I guess I just thought, I said, this Mr. Jones song is unbelievably good, and I didn't get sick of it.
Yeah.
No matter how much it was played, and I liked the video, and then they released another album, single around here, which I liked. I didn't love as much as Mr. Jones, and then I guess Rain King was kind of an unofficial single too. They didn't have a video for that. So I just bought I bought the album like I was buying a lot of album on tape while I was driving around my hometown, and sometimes in my dorm room. I have a CD? I was either right about to get a CD player, but for whatever reason, I think I had the tape first for August, and I just listened to that album, and I was like, every song is unbelievably good, and out of my top 10 albums at the time, I just kept going back of it, and the lyrics I thought were unbelievable, and I just one of the things, sometimes you don't know how or why it hits you, and it did. And then I had a friend that we bonded over it, usually after a few drinks, and so I guess I just want to say that's how I started. What about you?
See, I think I took a more winding road to it, because obviously I heard, Mr. Jones and Round Here, and I liked them, I guess, fine. I got a little more hooked with Long December and Daylight Fading. The first record of theirs that I actually bought was Recovering the Satellites. In I'm not even sure if I bought it. It might have been a Christmas present, but during that time period. But even then, it was sort of slower and built. And I remember someone gave me This Desert Life. Loved Colorblind, because Cruel Intentions, great film, especially if you're
Yep.
a teenager at the time. Very exciting movie. But even then, like, again, bits and pieces, liked the band, liked them. Um, didn't end up buying August and everything after, until when I was a freshman in college. I spent a lot of time at a used music store in the town, and I bought that record because I was trying to go back and was like, oh, there are these records that I know that I liked that I never owned for whatever reason, because I was maybe too
Mm.
young and I wasn't buying quite as many records at that stage. And so I went back, and I bought a bunch of things. I bought Throwing Copper from Live.
Yes.
I bought
Love
I
that. Love
bought
that album.
I bought Bat Out of Hell, which I love.
Oh,
Which
Meatloaf,
is a little
right?
older,
Yep.
obviously, but and I bought Dookie. I don't think I'd ever owned Dookie,
Oh.
and I finally bought it, as many years after the fact. But I bought August and everything after, and that started sinking me deeper. But I really think what ended up kind of hooking me, like fully kind of sinking in, was, this was the time period of LimeWire. It was a little past Napster, but like LimeWire and all those other things. And I think hearing the Across a Wire version of Mr.
Hmm.
Jones was really kind of what got me, that made me go, oh, wait a minute. I've heard this song. I like this song, but now I've heard this version and now I love this song. Now this is deep and interesting, and it's got this different, why is this beginning different? Why is the ending a whole other different thing? And this other ending is really cool. And that really kind of makes me think about stuff. And really that kind of time period, that going back and getting that, along with like Hard Candy coming out, weirdly enough, which is not super high on my list of favorite records anymore, but just sort of that time period, it was an excuse to go listen to them more. And then kind of got all the way in and around, I guess I'd say 2002, 2003, and never looked back, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because we can talk about this, and we'll have a future episode about Across the Wire. But I can't. And maybe there was music released in the 70s, 80s, or 60s or something that had this, but I cannot for the life of me think of a band that released an album shortly after. Right at that point they only had two releases, right, after
Right.
Across the Wire. So where basically every song, or almost every song, on that Across the Wire acoustic was different but still amazing. And you're right, it showed me something with how they were different than other bands musically, or how they approached live music, in addition to separating that from the lyrics and their prior albums. You're right, that was a big part of me. One thing I was thinking about
Hmm.
with obsessions that I have is that I guess it's kind of like friendships you have, or relationships. Mm, yes, I that album was probably, I'm guessing, my favorite album of that year or whatever. And then I was working actually at, I don't know if you remember Circuit City, kind of like a Best
Of
Buy,
course.
when Recovering the Satellites came out, and I saw like a
Mhm.
poster for it, and I'm buying that. But with a lot of obsessions, it's that it grows over time. Like, I guess consistency is something that means a lot to me, where like,
Mhm.
wow, that first album is amazing, the second album is different and amazing, the third album is different, and then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, this keeps going. And then I build up that kind of obsessive. I've done that with movie series. I'm trying to think of a good one, but even like, I don't know, the Mission Impossible series, for example. I like it kind of partly because it's a series that generally I thought had pretty good quality, so then I kind of build this loyalty, no matter, separate that from one particular movie being amazing or whatever.
Yeah, and especially some bands where you hear that great first record, and then it kind of tails off a little bit. There's something that's, you're like, oh, I like that record, and some songs later, and that intensity kind of wanes.
Yeah.
When I was younger, actually, I was like, well, I try not to go see a band on their first record because I want to, more. And it's like, actually, no, actually, if you love that first record, you should probably just go see them play it. I learned that lesson a couple of bands. I was like, no, because now they're playing new stuff, and I actually don't like this as much, and I really like the old stuff, and I'm disappointed they're not playing the old stuff. So,
Did you
um,
yeah, did you ever have people that, right, they say, like, you ask them what their favorite band is or favorite artist, and they
mm,
mention like someone who just has either one single or their first album. And sometimes I want to say, no, I'm not saying what are you listening to right now. I'm saying, like, what is your favorite all time. But some people can't separate that. Yeah,
yeah.
so that's so interesting. What so oh and we'll talk about this in a future podcast, but do you have either any friends or family or relationships that share the passion part, not just like them casually, or do some people either, almost laugh at you, the fact that you love Crows so much, etc.?
Well, I think there are people in this world, when you tell any they've seen any band like more than 50 times, people will go like, "That's weird," and it's like, no, that's actually normal if you're the right kind of person. To me, I know lots of
Right, or
people.
or go
I
by
think from
yourself. Maybe that some people don't like going to concerts by themselves, but I would see
oh
Crows
yeah,
by myself all the time if I could.
I would have gone to more shows by myself when I was younger if we had smartphones. Just because it got boring between sets sometimes. You know what I
Oh,
mean? You're
right.
like, what do you do
Yep.
now? Now people are like, I don't know what I'll do if I go to a concert alone. And it's like, you've got a phone in your pocket to entertain you for that 20 minutes. If you don't make a friend, you'll be okay. You will be okay. And when the music is playing, you don't need to talk to anyone about it, right? You can talk to them later, and you should be listening and not talking. And I think we all agree on that at a show.
No,
um,
no, that's great. And before I get into one other question, which is
yeah,
about concerts, actually, I did want to say one other thing about my obsession with Crows, because I guess it seems obvious, because I think anybody who's obsessed with the Crows, part of it is, of course, Adam's lyrics, right?
yeah.
And he has this, one of the genius parts of his lyrics is that he mentions things that are very specific but also somehow universal. And I don't know many artists that can pull that off. That it seems like he's telling a story that's just about a specific time. And not only could they be universal to other people, but also universal in time in some ways, right? And one thing that I'll never, and I'm not Adam's age. I think I'm about 10 years younger. I checked that out. But it just, there are certain, and I guess we all feel this way, but certain albums, like when they released, I remember even the Saturday night, Sunday mornings, that we'll talk about that album in the future, but I think he admitted later that that's kind of when he was going through his mental health challenges,
Mm.
whatever you want to call it, nervous breakdown, this kind of, or admitting these challenges. And that's also when I was feeling the exact same thing. Now, whether that's me thinking that or just time of life, or again, I was kind of overseas, but that kind of, I guess he's feeling like both grandiosity and like a Superman, and at the same time going through depression and everything's breaking apart. That's exactly what I was going through when that album was, and it just kept happening over and over. So that's one of the reasons I love too, and I'm sure lyrics are one thing that has brought you back over and over.
Oh, for sure. We'll get very deep into those, I'm sure, at some point in some of the songs. But yeah, I mean, that sense of that, like, I think we all kind of love people, musicians. Again, if you're someone who loves lyrics, it's someone who feels like a bit of an older brother, right, or a wise sage, who is
Oh,
who
I
is
never
kind of
thought
going
about
through
that.
something. They've gone through something, and they're kind of giving you advice about it in a certain way. Um, he's obviously Adam's a little bit older than me, but
Yeah,
again,
that's a good take. That is
maybe
a
he's
good
my
take.
younger uncle. I don't know in that case, but in the
Yeah,
same idea that like that they're that level of logic of they've seen it through, and you're going, okay, that's how I can look at this in a way and interpret my own experience.
yeah, that's right. And of course, it goes without saying, we already implied that we think the musicianship is amazing. The fact that a lot of the band has been there from the beginning and they all contribute things, and the fact that the band is like a team, right? Of course, they've, a couple members have come and left, but there hasn't been major disharmony and fights that has affected so many other great bands throughout time. And I think that's been a big net positive.
I always like Adam's quote about the about why he's like, people like, should I do you, or if you can do a solo album, he's like, why would I do that? I've got this team of people who support me in building this vision. So what do I need to go solo for? This is my these are my guys,
Yeah, and he
so
says it, and it is so yes, it's so honest when he says that. Of course, Adam, as you had to be in his thing, you have to have a bit of an ego and confidence and think, hey, I could write a solo album if I want. But when what is it, when they play Start Again in the
mm,
concert, and he mentions that, I love the song, we do it a lot in warm up, dress rehearsal, we do it a lot and it's like, I just love playing with my friends. This is fun. And they obviously are on the same page, and I'm not an expert on this, but when they do their kind of improvising, particularly in some of their earlier concerts, that a lot of that was just being on the same page, right? That you wouldn't
mhm.
have necessarily with other musicians. So
Yeah, hearing something and just knowing each other well enough to know and follow each other and sort of take that journey together. um yeah, it's interesting. You talked about, I again digress a little bit, but the one thing I want to say about people in your life who love this,
oh yes, yes.
when I met my wife, she was a Counting Crows fan, not quite as big as I was. And I was going through a very big Counting Crows kick at the time. I felt like it was one of their last, I think, real peaks as a touring act in sort of the early 2010s. And I was listening to those shows and a lot of the older ones too. And then somewhere a few years into our relationship, I think I burnt my wife out. I think she's
That is
I think it's
funny.
my fault. I think she would like Counting Crows more now if she didn't know me.
You, my
Because
my
she
friend, and
turned
I'm
at a
gonna
peak, but then she was like, yeah, sorry.
my best friend No from high school, who was the biggest Crows fan with me, he actually made a comment recently, which is not true. Now, part of this is somewhat true because of my age and the fact I listen to more podcasts now than I used to, which of course
Mhm.
takes away the music time. But I was talking to him about Crow, and he was like, "Do you listen to anything other than Counting Crows?" Which I do, but almost he was kind of making a similar comment, right? That in some ways maybe I've even burned him out through the years. No, that's so good. Yeah, no, I think I had some college friends. I do still have some friends. In fact, when Crow's News comes out, I want to say there's maybe 8 people that are friends of mine who I know like the Crows. And when I say like the Crows, I guess most of them now, I don't even know if they go to the shows, maybe every couple years, but they will buy all of the new releases that come
Mhm.
out. So I do have, I guess, like maybe 8 friends that certainly, if I send something, hey, the Butter Miracle's coming out, they'll all buy it, including my sister. So that's fantastic. So maybe one thing now, again, when we get to the maybe in about 10 minutes or so, or 15 minutes, we'll talk about the future plans of the podcast, what we plan to do on a regular basis. And when we do those future plans, for example, when we talk about live shows, we're going to talk about, of course, our memories of some of the live shows we've done. Um, but just for the sake of today's first episode, and having another bit of Q&A, we can preview that a little bit by maybe talking about briefly about your first concert you attended and maybe 1 or 2 memories of that, and then maybe even your most recent concert you attended and 1 or 2 memories of that.
Sure, sure. My first one is at Jones Beach, 2003, August 26th, I think. They played 2 nights there. I think it was the 26th. Um, I had terrible tickets, really, really terrible tickets. But Jones Beach is actually kind of a decent place to have terrible tickets because Jones Beach, it's really right on the water, on the beach in Long Island. Um, it of course comes up in that specific space comes up in Hard Candy, right? The evenings on Long Island when the summer starts to fade
All
is
right. Yep. Yep.
about him seeing a show at Jones Beach with his then girlfriend. I think it's a Neil Young show. Um, but it's a kind of an okay place to have terrible tickets because if you're close, you can see the band. So not a bad thing to have close tickets, but you can kind of see the water and kind of get that whole thing. Um, and I remember they opened with Rain King, which is one of my all-time favorite songs, and we'll
Oh
talk
wow.
about that song, I'm
Yeah.
sure, in great detail over the many episodes. And they went into raining in Baltimore and came back. And actually, the friend of mine next to me, who's also a Counting Crows fan, but maybe not quite the levels I was, said to me, he said, "Wait a minute, we're still in Rain King." I was like, "Yeah, isn't it great?" um, but yeah, and I just remember that night. I mean, it's a good show. I mean, I look back at 2003 and I go, that's a good year for the band, but not a great year. But of course, it's my first show, and so there's a lot of memories of those versions of the songs in particular, right? The slower version of Rain King that they were playing, and a few other things at that time. Also, the first time that weekend was the first time they played Washington Square. They
Oh.
played it in the encore because he just moved to New York, and that song's about sort of New York, and which was kind of cool. And that was part of like that maybe they're going to play a song that you've never heard before. I always appreciate a band that does that. I know that again that there are people who hate that, but I love hey, what's going to happen? Hey, we've got a couple of new ones for you. It's like, oh, maybe this is going to be my favorite song, and I'm going to be able to tell the story about being the first person or one of the first people to hear it. Um,
No, that's right. And I'll just say, I felt that way about Miami. I was able to
hmm.
hear Miami before it was released, and my friend that I was talking about, my high school friend, looked at each other, and especially that's a pretty darn good live song, and because of the crescendo of the energy and everything, and we looked at each other and we're like, that song's going to be special, right? But you're right. I guess I always think, oh, I heard it before it was released. So yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I always think that's an interesting song too because it's one of the if you like they've got two versions of that song, right? And I think their best songs live are the ones where they've got the rock and roll version, but they've also got that acoustic version that
right.
I wish they would use more. They use it for a lot in like 2008, 2009.
And not much recently. You're right.
Not much, yeah. And I think, man, that's that's one of the things I love about that song is you can kind of go. There's a really beautiful performance from like I think a Colorado radio station around the time when Hard Candy was released.
Mm.
That is like devastating. Like that's, and again, what I love about that song, you kind of go both. You can get the devastating sort of pathos of the lyrics, but also this big sort of celebratory. I'm making there's sadness in these things, but I'm also making a meal out of it, and I'm going to go have fun with my friends in New Orleans, and it's going to be okay, and we're all going to be okay together. So yeah, it's like such a great song. My most recent Crows experience was last summer at the Paramount Theater in Long Island. A good show. Played a couple interesting things in there. The other one, actually, I saw them twice that week, and the week before that week, and I up at the second time I saw it was at the Capitol Theater, and they played. We talk about more, but they played one of my White Whales. They played Speedway. They opened with Speedway, which is a song I'd been trying to hear them play for 10 years in a row.
Oh, that's yeah, it's great. And well, that's funny you said that because I actually got one of my white whales recently too, and I even mentioned this on the Reddit recently. Someone said something, but that's interesting. You told me before, but I had forgotten your first show was 2003. Because despite me being a fan since the quote unquote beginning, um, I did not see them. So most of my shows that I saw were between I think '02 and '05, and to
Yeah.
this day, because that was just again, it had to do with like, was I in the country at the time? I was out of the country a lot. Did I have any money to discretionary funds? A lot of times, no. Did I have a car to get to places? A lot of times, no. But I did have those things between '02 and '05.
I
And
did
then,
miss one. I will say I missed one. The one I've seen a lot of great shows. I have very few regrets. I did not have a car in 2007. I was trying to convince anyone to go with me to see them in Lakewood, New Jersey, kind of deep
oh,
into Jersey. I looked, there's
yeah.
like no public transportation, had a ticket, just could not get there. And that night, unexpectedly, they played August and Everything After straight through.
Oh, oh,
And I
wow.
remember looking at the set list next day and going, "Oh no, why couldn't I get there?" And then, of course, I did get to see them play it all the way through at Town Hall a few weeks later. But then, well, thankfully, I feel like that eased the regret. Was sort of like I've gotten lucky a
Yeah.
couple times in my life as a concert going fan of being like of getting not quite as good as the like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening version, but it's still cool when it does happen later. Um, but yeah, that and actually that's I think that part of it, the disappointment of missing that kicked off seeing them just a
Mm.
ton of times over the next couple of years, just because I was just like, I don't know what's gonna happen. I gotta keep going. Even if
No,
the last one wasn't as good, who knows what's gonna happen at the next one, you know?
it's funny. I think I've even heard Adam interviewed in the past to say something that you just brought up. Like when we have regrets, like sometimes we try to compensate about it for years, right? And that's what kind of you did with that concert.
Yeah.
Um,
It was
yeah,
good though. It was good compensation though. I think
yeah.
this was no downsides to this. Was all positive.
Yeah, my first show then I just looked up the exact date while we were waiting to start the podcast, but was in 1999. It was November. I had to see because they played a couple days, but in New York City, the Hammerstein Ballroom, November
Mhm.
7th, 1999, and that was shortly after This Desert Life was released. And so I have a couple memories of that. It's funny looking at the set list. I was like, geez, I didn't remember they played that. I do kind of remember them playing that one. But the two memories that stand out, one, of course, just the fact that I got to see them live. And again, at the time, I probably had 5 bands that were my co-favorites, but they definitely was obsessed with them. Now later, of course, they kind of separated themselves. But being able to see them live, of course, was amazing. I did have a bunch of beers at a bar next door before the show, and I say
Mhm.
that because that was kind of the first time I drank before a concert, and it ended up not being the last. And I want to say there's maybe been even 2 shows of Crows that I didn't enjoy as much because I was too drunk to enjoy. But the other thing that I'll never one thing that was interesting too, besides the fact that it was in even though it was in New York City, there's someone at the bar ahead of time. Some girl. I said that maybe she was 20 or something, and she I guess she said something like, "Oh, I'm obsessed with," or "Omaha is my favorite song." because I'm from Nebraska. We all love that song in Nebraska or something like that. So I thought that was funny that the whole state appreciated that song. But then also, but one thing that stood out to me, and I think me and you even talked about this before, was that I guess I didn't there's part of me that thought, particularly a band that is catering to the age of, you know what I mean, so let's just say the average fan at that time was 25 years old, or
Mhm.
or 20, or college age, and you think of college, being kind of more obsessive and have more time to listen to music than if you're 60 or whatever. So I say that because that was the first time I realized, I was like, wow, a lot of this crowd did not know the songs from Desert Life, even though it was released, I think, just a couple weeks prior. And then I was almost like, how could they be at a Counting Crow show and not know all the new songs from the new? And then, I didn't realize that not everybody was obsessive of me, or that thought they had to prepare for it for a concert or whatever. So, and they
I've
did.
definitely been that guy too. I remember not less with the Crows, but with the I remember going to a Strokes concert, and right after the second record came out, and being on the way in the car and being like, we gotta prepare, guys. They're gonna play some of these songs. We gotta be ready. We gotta know
Yeah,
these
in
songs.
fact, I'm checking it right now, and this makes sense. It was, I think back then, albums were released on a Tuesdays, so it
Mhm.
was released on November 2nd. And I kind of remember that we went on which was a Tuesday. We went on a road trip. The entire road trip, we listened to the album, and then got to New York. That would be 5 days later. Right. So on Sunday, right. So we saw them 5 days after the release of This Desert Life. And even though it's only 5 days, it's so silly in retrospect. I was like, how could these people not know all of the songs from the album released 5 days ago? Didn't they spend all weekend listening to it?
Well, not only was
Um,
it just 5 days, but you're in a car just bumping it. You're
yes.
like they're like maybe a big fan at that point is maybe on their fourth or fifth listen. You're
Right.
on your like 38th. You've just
Yes.
been like in a loop. You're going. You're just like, yeah, we've been driving for 5 days straight. We've been listening to nothing but this. Um, and
Yeah, that's
you're ready
right.
to go. Yeah, you
and
of
and it's
course.
and it's funny. And last thing about that is that I'm looking at the set list right now, and I think it tells you something about Crows. That I think it's seven of the 19 songs they played were from the new album, right? So yeah, they played a lot of the classics, right? They played Mr. Jones, they played Murder of One. I'm looking at it now. They played Daylight Savings, but Daylight Fading. Sorry, Daylight Savings. But they played Amy Hit the Atmosphere, which I think I told you that I think they've only played on that tour. Played 4 days. They played Speedway. So right, they were not going to miss the chance to promote their new album.
Well, they wanted
Uh,
to play that. Again, they were going to
yes,
play. I mean, and I actually really like that tour. I think that's when they were doing sort of the half in between version of Mr. Jones, where they were
yes,
doing
yes.
like the sort of rock and roll star intro, but then kind of the more rock and roll version of of Mr. Jones. So sort of the across a wire version, but closer to the original in terms of overall kind of tone and energy.
Yeah, no,
It's
no,
great.
that's right. Yeah, and I never, and I know we'll say this in a future episode, but the kind of idiosyncratic, or the things that they do that are a little different, these different versions, somehow the way he sings, or does things a little different than, as he said, we know how to play them now. He says that about a lot of songs. And of course, a lot of casual fans back in the late 90s, early 2000s that saw them at some show, like, oh, I don't really like that. I never understood it. And it wasn't one of those that I was defending them just because I like them. I
Mhm.
just said, like, no, I think this sounds actually a better version. And why you can play the CD if you want the exact one, and all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, I will say the most recent album I went, the concert I went to was in on their European tour that just happened last year, and the last one might have been the best concert I went to, in part because I guess it was the only time that I was right up front. I guess officially you call it second row. It was standing, right? I was behind somebody, but
Mhm.
like the best position, right? Basically right in front of Adam, and I was one person deep. And I could have been at the front if I wanted to go a little bit to the right, but I might have been like the ninth fan in the show. And so just being that close, and after being a fan of them for 30 years, was yeah, amazing. And I'll never forget that.
What was your white whale? What
Oh,
white
right.
whale
So
did you get?
yeah, so that was at the so in this European show, I saw 3 shows, and it's not that it's the number one white whale. I mean, because sometimes you have to be reasonable about your white whale too.
Sure.
Like if I've heard somebody say like, "Oh, I wish they play Einstein on the beat," like he said, he could change his mind. He said like 20 years ago, "I'm never going to play that in concert," so don't look for it. They haven't played like for example, what is it? She don't want nobody near or whatever. They haven't played that since
Yeah.
they released the greatest hits. They did played it for a couple months, I think.
Mm.
But I guess my recent white whale that I thought was a very small chance but possible was 1492. I never saw it live. And in this entire tour, the only time they played it, and I think the only time they played it in the last, I want to say 5 years, was at this concert in Manchester. He just randomly played it. Hardly anybody around me knew it, even if they were pretty I don't want to say hardcore, but pretty big fans that knew a lot of B-sides or non-singles, but they didn't really know 1492 or forgot about it. And yeah, he did end it by saying like, "Oh, I haven't played that song in a while, and now I remember why it kind of hurts my." And he goes, "It kind of hurts my voice a bit." But yeah, yeah. So um, anything else before we get into, well, it is 35. At first I was going to maybe preview, maybe you don't have to talk about it too much, but have you had, I know you told me once off podcast, maybe briefly about meeting some of the band members or any experience?
Sure. I've never talked to Adam. I've been basically as the Outlaw Road Show and Underwater Sunshine festivals. It's interesting. I've been very close to the man many times in like physical proximity, but I've never
Mm.
really shared a conversation with the guy. Um, I have met I've met Dan at one of those very briefly, just kind of talk with him a very little bit. And I met one of my first I met Dave Bryson after one of the Wellmont Theater shows in 2008. Speaking of sort of white whales, I had the second night. So that's one of my, if you haven't listened to the Wellmont Theater shows and you have Nugsnet, they're on there, and one of my recommendations. It's 3 nights in a row in 2008, and they didn't repeat a song with the exception of Long December, which Adam says he just forgot. They played it, and they repeated Rain King, but they played it 2 different ways. So to me, and it's Rain King, so I'll never say no to Rain King. But 3 nights, 50 something, almost 60 songs, and the night 2 of that, I got what was then my white whale, which is Mercury. I'd always loved that song. It had a lot of meaning to me about some relationship stuff, and I'd been like, I'd love to see them play that, and they played it very very rarely in that time period. So they busted that out. Um, Although also, again, it's the interesting thing with the Crows. There are those experiences of like you're having this big moment, and I remember the person who I was with, who was all again a fan of them, was really excited to see the show with me. Adam goes into this alt about sticking a needle in your arm and it feeling like love.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I'm always going with this. It's not my favorite version of Mercury, but okay, I'm seeing
Yeah.
Mercury. And my friend's like, what the hell is he talking about? What is this? This is A, this isn't in the song, and B, what is this? I'm like, I don't, he's just making stuff up right now. You gotta let
Oh,
it happen. They're
that's
not all gonna be classics.
that,
Um,
that's funny.
and the next night though, I remember going, and it was my friend Sandy, who it's the first time we met, was sort of figuring out how to get back from those shows. Now we've been friends for 15 years now, going to Counting Crows and other concerts together. And she said, is there anything you want to hear now that you got this? And I was like, well, it'd be cool to hear the ghost in you. But to your point, Eric, I was like, I'm a reasonable person. I don't think I'm ever going to hear them play that. They haven't
Right.
played that thing in like 15 years or something. Like, it'd be cool to see that, but like, I would just happen to be thinking about the song. It'd be nice if it happened, but there's no way it's ever going to happen.
Right. Right.
And they come the encore. It's Halloween, or right before Halloween. They come out in costumes. Adam as the bunny and Dave as Scooby Doo, and they play, just the two of them, the ghost in you. And I'm in your experience of 1492. I'm losing my mind. Everyone around me is like, oh, that's okay. That's nice. And
That
I'm literally like jumping. Like Sandy said, she's like, you could see the joy physically jumping out of you. Like it was all just, I was like exploding with excitement.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Did that that song might be on YouTube. I think that is that on YouTube. That one.
It might be. I mean, if they're in costumes, there's not too many where
It's
they came out and played it in a
Yeah, it's
costume.
one where they were both in costumes, and I want to say it's
Yeah.
that song, but I'll check that and confirm
I think
that
it's
maybe
I
for
think
the
it's I
next.
think it's on there because I did believe they've released a bunch of videos from that.
Oh, that's
Um,
so interesting.
but anyway, so my friend was waiting to go to the bathroom afterwards, and I was waiting for her before we got our ride back, and just happened to kind of wander back into the venue, and there's Dave Bryson talking to some people, and I was like, uh, I don't want to bother you, but I just want to tell you, man, that was incredible. I mean, it was just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. He's like, the song or the costume? And I was like, the song, definitely the song. And he was like, thank you, thank you. But yeah, I haven't
Well,
met them too much, but maybe as part of this thing, we'll have to try to
maybe
get
be able
chat
to
with them at
interview
some
some
point.
of them
Who
at some
knows?
time. Yeah, well,
Down the
my
road.
way would have it, and it is funny too because I have a different relationship with them. Sorry, as you get older, right? You change, they
Mhm.
change, you're relate, right? That, as I said, if you have 6 albums of history, that might be different than one album of history. I the first time I have a couple experiences, but none of them, you know, yeah, I guess maybe six little experiences. The one is I didn't hear them play, but I was there for the Hard Candy release party, which just
Mm.
happened to be in Philadelphia. They played the music. I'm forgetting the name of the song now for the show for NPR. They played like a little
Mm. Oh,
set.
World Cafe.
World Cafe.
Yes.
I did not make it into the World Cafe, but after that, they allowed people to come in and get, I guess you had to buy the CD there, but you can get the CD signed by all of them. And of course, it's
Oh.
just a line and they quickly, and you don't even say anything to them, whatever. But I hung around a bit, and some of them later then started walking. It was at Tower Records, I think, and
Mhm.
started walking around. And, Adam, especially back then, loved perusing CD stores or whatever. If I remember correctly, I did not bother or talk to him at all because he looked like he didn't really have that many people bothering him, but he looked like maybe he was he wanted to concentrate on his music. And so there were a couple other walking around. The only two I think I said hi to was Matt Malley at the time and Dave Bryson.
Mm.
I think Matt I talked to a shorter period of time. I think I didn't have any. I wasn't sure what to say. Dave, I talked to them actually about make sure you play all your songs. Like, never take anything out of the rotation. I think I said something to him about Miller's. I think I said something to him about Miller's Angels. I was like, Miller's Angels, you haven't played that much, and he just kind of laughed and he's like, oh, we try to play everything. I did my only real interaction, and I did have a group. The other thing that I guess would group, I did do one of the meet and greets with them.
Mm.
So I kind of quickly said, but I didn't talk to any of them. I guess the only ones I said is I joke with Jim because I kind of stood next to Jim
Mhm.
and I made a funny comment to him, and I think I said how much I love Dave Bryson, and Jim's like, "We all love Dave Bryson." Before they took my photo, the I did meet Emmy out, but I was really drunk then. I saw Emmy outside of a show talking to six fans, and they had their thing, and I kind of said hi, and I didn't really interrupt, but I didn't have anything to say to him, and I was kind of
Mm.
stumbling around. I guess that was about it. There was one time that Adam, and he would never do this. He was on a college tour, and I went, and I guess it was after the show. I guess after. I'm trying to think now. It was before or after. Might have been before, but he was there, and there was like 15, I guess, college students around
Mhm.
him and just asking him questions. Mostly they were, I think, a couple from the radio station or the
Yeah.
newspaper asking questions and a couple of fans. My friend insists to this day, this is about 20 years ago, that Adam might have been either trying to pick up or flirt with maybe one or two of the young women. I don't know. That was very quick. But I remember I said like one. No, it was after the show because I said thanks for one. I didn't ask him a question, and then I made
Mm.
one. I guess I'll say this now that I made one comment that, and because I didn't know what else to say, I was almost trying to show that I was a fan and get in. And I think it was just a down. And I think he had just moved to New York, and I think I said, "Oh, congrats on the move to like, are you officially a New Yorker now?" And he looked at me kind of annoyed. He's like, "I'm not officially anything." or something. Which is funny because he was there kind of doing a Q&A, but I guess that wasn't the best question. So I guess that's my experience meeting the band for the most part. So very little, but as you said, it would be great in the future to talk to one or all of them at some point. So speaking of the future, I guess we've been talking for 45 minutes. So I guess for the most of the, let's say, last 15 minutes, we just want to preview the ideas and the future episodes that
Mhm.
we're going to have. And I do want to say, and I'll probably say this every episode, beside, despite the fact that we are going to be, I guess, the official co-hosts of the show, we're always looking for I guess I want to say regular other co-hosts that want to come on maybe every 5 episodes, or come on when we talk about their specialty. Maybe it's bootlegs. There's a lot of bootleg experts out there. I am not one of those, so we'd love to hear from you about that. If you want to be on, maybe even as a one-time fan, just to talk about your experience or love with the Crows, we would love to have that too. So we'll put the email on there. Our email is Sullivan Street PC. So Sullivan Street, street written out, PC for podcast, at protonmail.com. And we will get your email and respond to that, particularly any kind of course, thoughts, advice, suggestions, feedback. And if you want to be a guest, either maybe regular or one time, we'd love to hear from you there too. So for future plans, of course, like Chris kicked off in the show saying, hey, one thing is that if there's any news about the band, we will kick off any episode. And so even though now we're far in, I'll just let you talk about, of course, the, I guess, quote unquote, the big news is that they just finished their, I guess it's Australian and South African shows,
Mhm.
taking a little break, and then kick off, like you made a point, which I didn't catch right away, that this is one of their probably longest tours in a long time.
Yeah, it's a full 3 months. They're going out with Dashboard Confessional. Not a band I've spent a ton of time with, but I'm kind of excited. One of the things about seeing a band a lot of times, that you love, is that if they're going on tour with other bands, you end up watching that band several nights in a row.
Mm.
And there are a few bands that I've seen with the Crows that I'm good on at this point. I'm good. I didn't, I was when they were announced, and I heard there were rumors that there was going to be kind of a a bigger kind of like shed tour, which would generally involve multiple larger bands.
Right.
I was just hoping. I was mainly, for me, as much as I joke about, I mentioned earlier that I'd bought Throwing Copper. I don't need to see live ever again. I've seen them a couple times with the Crows. I'm good. It was a nice experience. I'm good.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm glad to see them out with a band that I haven't seen before in full. Interestingly, I've seen Chris Caraba. I saw him with the Crows. He showed up once at the town hall thing, and did a couple of songs. And I've also seen his band Twin Forks once or twice with,
Okay.
actually with Augustana,
Mm.
or slash Dan Laius, who was of course I discovered through the Crows, and we'll talk about some of those bands down the
Yeah.
line. But so I'm excited to see them. But yeah, they're out there for a while. So if they're not coming to a town near you, they probably don't like you. I hate to break this to you, but they probably aggressively don't like your town. You guys did something somewhere down the line, and because they're hitting like everywhere. So
Yeah.
I
No,
think
that
I'm gonna go see them. I think I'm gonna go see them at Jones Beach again. I think that's the plan, is back to where it all
okay.
began, and see them on the store. How about you? Do you think
Yeah,
you're
we're
gonna see them in the
we're
store?
we're yeah we're both I guess originally quote unquote Northeasterners. I'm originally from Philadelphia, and you're living in the New York metro. I am now in Southern California, and I've been here for about a decade now. I will see them twice on this show. I mean, part of it too, which I guess their accountants and managers. I hate the term, like, like nostalgia shows and stuff like that. And of course, there's even a joke that when a band becomes a nostalgia tour, they can charge more money, because at that point the audience has more money and they've already established their fan base, and that's where they generate a lot of their income from. But along those lines, being such a big crow's head I am, a obsessive person, if you will, that from now on, unless just the circumstances don't allow it, I don't know how much longer they're going to tour for. I don't know. It could be a long time, could not be. So I'm going to try to see them at least once every tour. So I am going to see them at the Highland show at the Yamava Theater. That is about an hour and a half east of LA, and not too far from where I live. And then I will be seeing them at the YouTube Theater in Los Angeles. I've never been there. So if any listeners of the podcast are heading there, you can email me. We can meet up ahead of time or during the show. That'd be fantastic. I might try to make it to the San Diego show. That's a bit of a question mark. Particularly I think because the main tickets went to people that are quote unquote members of that
Hmm.
park. But I know there's some on the secondhand, so we'll see. We'll see. But yes, well,
Yeah.
any news about the tours and new albums, of course, or anything at all, we'll talk about. Obviously, any podcast that focused on a band, one thing we're going to do, and currently we plan to have the next podcast episode 2 kick off this, is that we will review all of their albums one by one. All of the main albums will be our first focus, but we'll also be looking at the live albums, looking at all their other songs. Um, Obviously, concerts are one reason why people, maybe the hardcore Crows heads, have become obsessed with the Crows or have been in the past. Um, so there's the official releases where they released entire concerts. Then there are some available on YouTube, etc. Like you said, they had that reissue of re-recording the whole August live.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, the bootleg shows, if you will, that the Crows, and Adam said this a lot of times in his interviews. There's not. Well, maybe there is, but they've basically recorded every show ever.
Hmm.
I think there's a couple they haven't been able to release for various reasons. So we'll get in. We've talked about our first and most recent concert details and memories, but we'd love to also hear yours. We also have a lot in between. Chris Miggs has gone to many more shows than me, even though I maybe quote unquote started before you. I forget what my list is. I think it's around 20 because I said there was a lot of times that I've missed, and you said you believe you're above the 50 mark.
I know I'm somewhere in the 50s. I have to find the list and see. I know I crossed over 50 at some point, and I'm still somewhere in that middle of the 50s. But yeah, and if you are a bootleg person and you're listening to this and you don't have a big collection or haven't gotten deep and you want to get further, my highest recommendation is to go to Crow's Town and sign up and become a part of the community there. That we've built a pretty as big a library, I think, as exists of Counting Crows recordings that are publicly available. I'm sure there are some there. I'm positive there are many that exist that do not exist out there in the world right now. But if 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 it's out there, I think we found it. And I used to love, again, we'll talk about our journeys. I mean, I used to love message boards. I mean,
Yes.
Reddit's good, Facebook it works, but I loved the message board at Crowstown. Boot City was a great one. I found so much
Oh,
great stuff there. The Cloud Cuckoo Land,
yes. That was the
the
official one, right? I
right, the
actually
official
had.
fan club message board.
Yes. Right. I actually had, I think, the Cloud Cuckoo Land either T-shirt, or I did join that official fan club when it first started.
I
Yeah,
have
no, there
no
was at
idea where
least a
my T-shirt
sticker.
is, and it bums me out. I love that T-shirt.
I think yeah, mine,
Um,
my
the
mine did
first one,
last.
and I will also point out, I will shout out Hummingbird's Nest. I don't know if the person whoever ran that has not been around in a long time, but that's one of the first place I started to find bootlegs and like going on webs. They had whole shows and they would post them, and it would take me 6 hours to download one because I had very slow internet and MP3s were,
Yep.
even at the time, to download 4 megs of an MP3 was difficult. But that's a place where I found so much, and again, it really brought me in. So we'll talk again. We've got so
Well, no,
much
no,
time and so much to talk about.
yeah, thank you for the segue because that was actually one of the future episodes, not just one episode, but future topics that I wanted to mention, which is, and that's where I'd like to hear from the community more because even though I guess I was mostly a lurker on most Counting Crows fans communities throughout the time. People would not know me, but there is an interesting history, and I've even seen some people try to talk about it on Reddit. As I said, I always went to what was it, AnnaBegins.com,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Yeah.
think people know who that is, and I guess she was sometimes involved in the community. I'd love to interview her, and I know that the person, the woman who was in charge of that site, also got hired by Adam and Company to run the official message board. And of course, by the way, there's even, I guess, Adam, if I remember correctly, even made national news for kind of chastising some of the fans on his own message boards. So even that like is funny. It's part of the history. And as you said, please go to Crowstown. We're looking to get a couple people from there on
Yeah.
our on the podcast. And as you said, I know some of the Facebook groups because when I went to I mentioned to you before when I went to the Birmingham UK tour about I guess it was only about 5, but I saw
Mm.
people kind of congregate after the show, and they weren't standing near each other during the show, but they obviously knew each other and they wanted to talk about stuff. Well, guess what? Those are the obsessive fans who knew each other from the Facebook group, including a gentleman named Dan who lives around there, who I'll hopefully get on at some point.
Yeah.
And this, I guess, goes without mentioning, but I will say that not only are we going to talk about the songs when we review the albums, and we want to compare some of the songs to their alts, of
Mm-hmm.
course, like you just hinted across the wire. But we could do a show, and this almost I got reminded of this when I'm seeing they're having like the quote unquote March Madness battle of the songs on Reddit right now.
Oh.
Like they have like a little tournament they're doing, and they're trying to, and of course the earlier stuff is winning, but they do have, including like Ghost in You, they have some of the unreleased or quote unquote B-sides in the competition as well. I mean, we could do a whole show on I guess I want to say the official songs that were not on an album
Mm-hmm.
songs, right?
Yeah.
Like the song from Rounders, like Ghost in You. Yeah. So we'll have that, and of course there's the unreleased songs and even some of those demo tapes that some of those got included, for example, on the August reissue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So and of course I think even Adam talked about this on his own podcast, but you could even do a show on Adam related songs that he either helped write or he
Mm-hmm.
guested on. Yeah, and I know some of them, I don't know all of them. And you could talk about any other themes you had. I know some examples we talked about were, of course, some theme pods on certain lyric, focusing on the songs that have the best lyrics or some of the
Mm-hmm.
most memorable lines that only Adam could do,
Yeah.
and ones that maybe remind you of you or your friends, your relationships and families. Some that maybe involve partying, etc. Yeah, I mean we could, and there's so much to unpack. We can
Yeah.
talk about his record labels, which
Mm-hmm.
he sometimes says he doesn't like talking about. He kind of makes fun of that. He said, "Oh, they didn't go as well," but I actually think there's a bit of success story in that, even if some of
Yeah.
those record labels aren't around. And as we said
Bands they've
last,
taken on tour,
yes,
those
oh, of
two.
course, of
And
course.
and Tyrannosaurus Records is to me, it's always going to be a success. Just because my wife's favorite T-shirt is the Tyrannosaurus Records shirt she stole from me.
Yeah, where it's like it's the T Rex out of a vinyl,
DJing,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
T-Rex,
Oh,
T
DJ
Rex
with the
DJing,
vinyl.
DJing. And my wife stole that from me 11 years ago, and
Oh, that's
still
fun. It
has
still
it.
has
So,
it.
that's it's a success if just for that. It was a cool T-shirt.
Yeah, no.
It's still a cool T-shirt. I just don't get to wear it anymore. But yeah, I also think I actually was as we were talking, I really think at some point as we get deeper, it'd be fun to go back and listen to some of the shows that we went to and
Mm.
talk about some of those experiences. But
Yes.
with also the benefit of hindsight and audio, right? Do you remember it that way? Because there are certain things where you're like, I remember it like this, and you go, it actually didn't sound that way. It's our brains, our memories and these things coming together, and
And
those
as you
stories
said,
again. That's part of the joy that the journey is in those shows, right?
yeah, and that they might have played songs that you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't appreciate that, or I was maybe had a few drinks and didn't. And as I said, for just a random example, that from that 1999 show, they played Amy Hit the Atmosphere, and yeah, I was like, oh, again, the album was only out for 5 days, and I said, oh, I like that song because that did catch my ear in the beginning. And guess what? I think after that tour, they basically have not played that song since. So I was like, geez, if I knew that at the time, I really, really would have paid
I
attention.
would have savored it. Yeah,
I would
no,
have
it's hard.
savored even more.
And it's mood. I mean, I think there's some shows that I think I look back at and I go, I don't know if that was as moving for like anyone else in the crowd, but just the way my mind was working at the time, maybe where I was standing, the way the music hit me that night was different than it might have been for anyone else. Everyone else might have gone, that was a good show. That was, and the band might say that was just a normal show, but I was like, no, that night was, important for me. So it'll be interesting to go back and find some of those, and we'll dive in. But there's so much, again, there's so much to dive into. As you said, I could talk about, someone asked me again, why are you doing Counting Crows podcast? Like, well, I got a lot of things to say about Counting Crows, so may as well
Yeah,
say
me
them to
too.
a
Right. I
microphone.
have 30 years of pen up, right, and it's not enough to that I have voiced about it to others, including my friends. I guess, yeah, I have an unlimited Yeah, I used to joke. It's kind of like my angst. No matter how much I get out, I still have a lot inside that could also use another release or whatever.
Mm.
So, no, no, that's great. I think we've right. I think we did a great introduction and a little preview. And again, if any of those topics, if you think that you either have something to say or you're a quote unquote expert, or there's even a certain album that you're like, hey, when you review Desert Life, please, can I be one of the people that talks about my favorite songs there? Sure. Again, send us email at SullivanStreetPC at protonmail.com. And I'll also put the email in the episode description. Any other? We've reached almost the hour mark exactly. Did you have any last wrap ups? Our current plan is to do August and everything after, which would likely be a 2-part episode next. We might save it for the third one, but that's coming up. Anything else to mention at all?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is great. I hope this kicks off as I said, our regular podcast, which we hope to release about every 3 to 4 weeks. And until next time,
Yeah.
uh, we will be hanging out at Sullivan Street,
Yeah.
waiting for you. Thanks so
Take the
much.
way home that leads back to until next time.
Thank you.